Hey, this is Miss Hardy. Welcome to part 1 of a series of video lectures on chapter 24 of your textbook, An Affluent Society, 1953 to 1960. So as the name would suggest, these lectures will be dealing with the United States in the 1950s during the Eisenhower administration and discussing the culture, the foreign policy, and some of the social and cultural movements during that time. So this should be a three-part lecture. We'll see how things go. Sometimes things happen and I have to stop unexpectedly, but that's the plan. So we're going to be picking up after the end of the Truman administration and dealing with the impacts of both the Cold War and the post-war economic boom on the United States. So one of the first parts of your textbook is that first page is discussing the events of what's now known as the kitchen debate, and you have an opportunity in Moodle. There is a link to a short clip showing Vice President Richard Nixon and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev taking part in some of this kitchen debate, which took place at an exhibition in Moscow, where the United States brought its consumer goods, and they were being kind of showcased against the products of Soviet industry, and it showcased the fundamental differences between communism and the society of the United States, with the United States bringing its innovations, its work-saving innovations for the modern housewife, while the Soviet Union is showcasing its, it's more focused and less consumer-focused society. But it was an exhibition of what has come to be called soft power. And this is winning hearts and minds with Coca-Cola and Levi's jeans and all other aspects of American culture, movies and TV shows and books, rather than actual intentional diplomacy and bullets and that sort of thing. So soft power was a major part of the Cold War. So in getting into the rest of the chapter, the United States in the 1950s has often been called the golden age of capitalism. There are lots of innovations that are taking place, and the standards of living in the United States are rising. Incomes are, there's economic expansion, there's stable prices, there's low unemployment, rising standards of living, lots of innovation, television, air conditioning. Yes, one of my favorite innovations. Air conditioning makes the South livable. But also dishwashers, things like dishwashers and other kitchen gadgets, washing machines, long-distance telephone calls, jet air travel, electricity and central heating and plumbing are becoming the standard rather than a sign of luxury. And wages are rising and all of this is contributing to what is seen as a golden age for capitalism. So during this period, the United States is the world's predominant industrial power. We are producing most of the world's cars and airplanes, steel, and although there would be widespread industrial redevelopment after World War II in both Japan and Western Europe, the U.S. is going to remain at the forefront of that. The centers of manufacturing in the United States are beginning to shift away from the old industrial heartland of the Midwest and toward the West Coast and the South, especially those areas especially benefiting from government spending on military and defense contracting. This will be, in many ways, the last industrial age of the United States, because after the 1950s, the U.S. economy is going to shift almost entirely or largely away from manufacturing and be more centered on services and technology, with white-collar jobs outstripping blue-collar jobs in many ways. There's also going... But as you can see from the from this graph, This is a graph of the real gross domestic product per capita between 1790, okay, so this is pretty long, and 2014. So this is covering about over 200 years, but you can see there's this major dip, right? This is the Great Depression, and then this is World War II, little dip after World War II, and then the 50s start, and it just takes off like a rocket ship. And that last little dip here, that's the Great Recession of 2008. So looking at this chart, you can see the reality of this economic prosperity. But as far as agriculture, the trend is continuing towards fewer and larger farms, with family farmers being squeezed out of the market. But even as there are fewer and fewer people engaged in agricultural work, the amount of agricultural input continues to rise due to technology and efficient machinery, chemical fertilizers, and insecticides, and the growth of corporate farms in California is going to be a major trend in American agriculture. And that's going to lead to a lot of things, especially citrus fruits that had once been luxuries becoming staples, a staple part of the American diet. For the rest of the world, in terms of where people are living, the suburbs become king. Post-World War II, the GI Bill and the benefits provided by the federal government, the assistance in buying houses in terms of federally insured mortgages. And again, the importance of a federally insured mortgage is that banks are more willing to lend money if they know it's insured by the government. They're also able to lend money at much lower interest rates because it is a federally subsidized loan, meaning interest rates are much lower, making it more possible for more people. So that's why federally insured mortgages are important. So the suburbs, this is where all of those hundreds of thousands, the millions of GIs coming back from war, getting married, or either getting married immediately post-war or rejoining their families and buying a home for the first time. So there's a massive demand for houses because so many more people are wanting to buy single-family homes. So there is a massive boom in residential construction. And one of the outcomes of this is the development of cookie-cutter suburbs. Builders use prefabricated and new building techniques to quickly and cheaply build subdivisions filled with hundreds of identical homes that can be sold at quite reasonable prices to these new suburban dwellers. So there's going to be a lot of spending on residential construction and consumer goods. As a result of these new suburbs and subdivisions, the most famous of which is Levittown, built by brothers William and Alfred Levitt. Shortly after the war on Long Island, they took 1,200 acres of Long Island potato fields and turned it into cookie-cutter suburbia. One other aspect of the development of suburban communities is the creation of a new type of retail development, the shopping mall. No longer do you have the mixed-use city neighborhoods where a grocery store and clothing store are all within walking distance. Instead, you need a self-contained place where a housewife can drive in the car and go get everything she might need. So these malls are being built solely for access by car. So it's a changing view of what American cities and communities look like. The West is also growing. The modern West will emerge in the post-war years. California is going to get in on that suburban boom with massive population growth, with the pleasant climate especially in Southern California, as well as places like Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, all are going to be made much more livable by air conditioning. Air conditioning, yes. Again, like I said, air conditioning is key. Air conditioning. So nobody wants to move to Arizona until there's air conditioning. All of these places are becoming much more populated. The growth in military spending, the invention of air conditioning. California is going to become the most prominent symbol of the post-war suburban boom, with more than 30 million people moving west of the Mississippi between World War II and 1975. And a fifth of the population growth of the 1950s is going to occur in California alone. And it's going to become the most populous state in the Union in 1963. So most of the growth in the West is taking place in metropolitan areas: Los Angeles, Phoenix, Tucson, Dallas, Houston. All of these are going to experience massive population booms, and these cities are growing in a very different way than cities in the East had grown. They're going to be decentralized clusters. They're not going to be a downtown with business districts with residential neighborhoods linked to it by public transportation. No, these are going to be decentralized clusters that are only going to be navigable by car. They're going to have very little, very disconnected public transit systems. Most of the public transit that had existed in cities like Los Angeles is going to be dismantled after World War II, and a lot of that had to do with the lobbying of the automobile industry. All of this life is going to be centered around cars. The only way you can get what you need and exist in these areas is if you have a car. And that's going to be, most evident in California, with some estimates saying that a third of Southern California land was paved over with roads and parking lots. So between highways and lawns, a lot of the native fauna of Southern California and California in general is going to disappear. With grass becoming, more land is cultivated in grass than in any other crop in the United States. Fun fact. The United States is going to become, in many ways, again, a consumer culture, with a measure of freedom becoming the ability to gratify market desires. Whether or not you can buy what you want is going to be determining your freedom. And so consumerism is going to replace economic independence and democratic participation as central definitions of American freedom. This goes back all the way, if you took U.S. History 1, all the way back to the beginnings of America. There have been different definitions of freedom, with ideas of economic independence being freedom, democratic participation, the right to vote being freedom, and now the ability to participate in the consumer economy being defined as freedom. And it's going to become a part of definitions of patriotism as well, with it's felt that consumer culture is demonstrating the superiority of the American way to communism. So no area of American life is safe from the Cold War. And so participating in this mass consumption culture and the consumer capitalism is being seen as a patriotic act. It's helping your country win the Cold War. And so that is becoming a defining aspect of American freedom. Another defining aspect of American culture during the 1950s is becoming the television. In 1954, Swanson will find itself with a snafu. The Swanson Food Company ended up with a whole buttload of turkeys on its hands after Thanksgiving. What are they going to do with all these turkeys? They don't want They don't want to waste all that money, so somebody has an idea. And they took all those turkeys, baked them up, put them on a metal tray with stuffing, mashed sweet potatoes, and green peas, and marketed them as a TV dinner. The idea behind a TV dinner is that it's a nice, full meal that mom doesn't have to cook. You pull it out of the freezer. And again, this is only possible thanks to the consumer culture and the spread of electric appliances to almost every home in America. Pull this out of the freezer, heat it up, and then you have a tray and you eat in front of the TV. TV dinners will become a staple of American society as millions of people embrace the novelty of not having to cook. And TV is not only going to impact eating, but it's also going to impact information and entertainment. TV is going to replace newspapers as the most common source of information, with nightly news anchors like Edward R. Murrow and Walter Cronkite becoming some of the most trusted people in America. It's also going to become a leading leisure activity, replacing the radio as the source of entertainment for millions of Americans who would gather around the TV for each week for The Adventures of Superman, starring George Reeves, or the Dick Van Dyke Show, or any of a number of sitcoms, dramas, westerns that are going to become incredibly popular. This is an era of very little choice. So I don't know, sometimes when I'm going through my Hulu and my Amazon Prime and my HBO Max and my Disney Plus, I'm trying to say, what do I feel like watching? I don't know. I don't feel like that. Well, what about this? I sometimes begin to wonder if the amount of choice that's available in entertainment these days is not a little bit of a not so great thing, because I get so paralyzed that sometimes I'm just like, nah, I'm just going to watch Psych again. Just watch something I've already watched. It's nice. It's comforting. So who knows? Maybe the 1950s had the right idea. You have one thing to watch. That's it. Three things to choose between. But TV programming in the 1950s is overwhelmingly going to be pretty chill, pretty white, pretty vanilla. It's going to not really engage in a lot of controversy. It's going to be very bland and non-confrontational and non-controversial in what it is portraying. So a lot of the shows are going to be very safe and very much geared toward advertisements, selling more of the consumer goods, and shows that portray the lifestyle using those consumer goods. Other parts of the standard consumer package are going to become a new car and life on the highway. And the idea of buying a new car every couple of years is going to kind of come out of the marketing genius of Detroit. Car manufacturers quickly figured out that by making cars a status symbol and making changes to the design of cars every couple of years, you can make it a social necessity for people to upgrade their car and buy a brand new car every few years. Keep up with the Joneses. So a new car is going to become a part of the standard consumer package. If you have any aspirations to being even vaguely middle class, you're going to have a car. And that's going to transform daily life in the nation. It's going to make auto manufacturers and oil companies some of the most valuable companies in the United States. It's going to make Detroit and its environs very, very wealthy and very comfortable. And it's also going to change Americans' habits. Along the widespread purchase of cars, along with the interstate highway system, and we'll talk about the construction of that a little later in the chapter, but it's going to alter travel habits. Long distance travel going on a road trip across the country. All of a sudden, that's possible in a way that it just wasn't before the creation of the interstate highway system. And with long distance travel becoming common, new types of businesses are needed. Gas stations along those interstations quickly become ubiquitous. You also need places to stay if you're going on that long-term trip. So motels become much, much more common. And hey, you're in that car. Don't you want to see a movie? Drive-in theaters. And also, you need somewhere to eat. You don't want to get far off the highway. Fast food becomes a major part of American life. McDonald's the first McDonald's was opened in California was opened in Illinois in 1954, but California businessman Ray Kroc would come with this idea, say, hey, this is great, and he will franchise McDonald's, and it will become widespread within 10 years. So the car is going to symbolize individual mobility and private choice for Americans, and that is going to be reinforced through advertising as well. For women, the 1950s are a time of going back homes. Most women lost their industrial jobs they had gained during World War II, and so they're largely going to go back home and be wives and mothers. Those women who did work would not be working to raise their family out of poverty, but to support the family's middle-class lifestyle. The ideal of the 1950s becomes a husband and a wife, with the husband having a job that supports his family, and a wife who keeps the home pristine and looking like a picture. The 1950s is also the baby boom. Baby boom refers to the years immediately after World War II. This is 1945. This is the birth rate in 1947. It jumps precipitously. The result of this is pretty self-explanatory. Millions of young men who had been away at war came home, either came back to their wives or got married and got busy. So the phrase that has become kind of ubiquitous in today's culture, the okay boomer, it's referring to the baby boom generation, those people born between 1945 and about 1961. These baby boomers, the children largely the children of World War II veterans who began having larger families after they come back from war. So the baby boom is going to have impacts on family life, on culture, as more children need more schools, need more stuff, all of that. But men and women are marrying younger. The average age for a man's first marriage is 22. A woman is 20 or 24. No, 22 and 20. There's a much lower rate of divorce and more children. The baby boom is going to lead the American population to increase by about 20% during the 1950s, even with very low immigration. Americans are just having a whole lot of babies. It's also reflecting that there are longer lifespans in general, thanks to especially to the invention of antibiotics. But the family is also becoming a weapon in the Cold War, with the ideal of a woman who can stay home and have a wonderful life thanks to all of the gadgets of that American capitalism is able to provide. And that's a weapon in the Cold War. It's being contrasted with the Soviet model, where men and women both worked outside the home, and a high percentage of women in communist countries are working. This is a much more modern relationship. The ideal has gone very much from marriage being a male-dominated institution to it becoming an equal partnership with both partners receiving fulfillment from the relationship, and the ideal is that women are gaining their personal freedom through the use of labor-saving devices in the home. And as a result of this ideal, the feminist movement seems to disappear from American life completely, with women expected to find contentment in motherhood and being housewives, and the home, and they're also being kind of contained within the home, the social structure is changing as you move from kind of cooperative urban neighborhoods to the very self-contained single-family homes of the suburbs. Those suburbs are very much segregated landscape. They are going to retain very rigid racial boundaries. Federal agencies are going to continue to finance housing segregation through the practice of insuring mortgages that do not allow for the home to be resold to someone of a different race, thus financing housing segregation. The Supreme Court is going to declare that those types of mortgage contracts are legally unenforceable, but they will continue to be issued, and housing segregation will continue well into the 1960s. New developments will often refuse to sell houses to blacks. William Levitt of Levittown fame, he said, if we sell one house to a Negro family, then 90 or 95% of our white customers will not buy into the community. So it's very much a business decision, but it is exacerbating and continuing segregated communities. As a result, public housing and urban renewal are also going to be very detrimental to minority communities. The federal government the Housing Act passed by Congress in 1949 is going to authorize the construction of more than 800,000 units of public housing, but those are going to be limited, very limited by income, and it's going to ensure that they are limited to the very poor. And that is the result of lobbying by private contractors who do not want subsidized housing projects infringing on their private housing markets. And so they are going to be increasingly confined to segregated neighborhoods in inner cities and are going to become associated with poverty and crime. And while this is happening, there's also an incredibly detrimental aspect of government planning is going to be taking place. Under the name of urban renewal, earnest progressives are going to undertake projects that are aimed at revitalizing cities that have been being stripped of value as wealth moves to the suburbs. But what they are going to end up doing is advocating for massive investment in projects to build that are supposed to be, bringing that economic revival to cities. But in order to bring economic revival, you've got to build stuff that people want. Well, they want baseball stadiums, they want retail centers, they want universities. Well, where are we going to put it? Well, look at all these poor people that have houses here near the center of cities. Oh, that's really valuable real estate. And through the use of government power and eminent domain, the homes of hundreds of thousands of poor, largely minority homeowners are going to be seized, oftentimes at much lower than their actual value, and they're going to be forced out of long-term cohesive communities, often being pushed into those federal housing projects where communities that had existed for decades would be torn apart and instead replaced with kind of soulless government housing. And in return, And on the location of those former neighborhoods, baseball stadiums, universities, middle-income housing complexes, retail centers, things that the people who had lived there can't afford or don't really care about are going to be built and largely benefiting much wealthier people. So whites are going to retreat to the suburbs. Non-whites are left to find housing in rundown city neighborhoods in federal housing projects. So suburbanization is going to very much harden the racial lines of division. 7 million white Americans are going to leave the cities for the suburbs. 3 million blacks are going to move from the southern states to northern cities, often ending up in existing urban neighborhoods, sometimes creating new urban ghettos. Racial exclusion is going to become self-enforcing. Whites are fearful that any non-white presence in their neighborhoods is going to destroy property values. Real estate brokers will use that fear with a tactic called blockbusting. Blockbusting being where they will use the fear of someone of a different race moving into a neighborhood to essentially force people to sell all the white neighbors to sell out, thus creating, again, instead of creating racially integrated neighborhoods, the one black family moving into a neighborhood would be followed with all the white neighbors selling their houses, and thus kind of within a few years creating another racially segregated neighborhood. So throughout the 1950s, Cold War affluence is going to coexist with urban decay and racism. Religion is going to be put into service to this cause of anti-communism. It's going to be the religious nature of American society is going to be put in opposition and showcased as an opposite to godless communism. The national motto, "In God We Trust," will be included on American currency for the first time in 1957. And the existing religious tensions between Protestants, evangelicals, fundamentalists, Jews, are all going to kind of try to be absorbed under a new idea, the idea of a Judeo-Christian heritage, that Jews, Catholics, Protestants, they all have more in common with each other than they do with communists. So the common values that they share being the heritage of the United States, and that idea is going to be contrasted with communism. And they kind of all have free enterprise as a common religion. Consumer capitalism and the selling of free enterprise is going to be a major aspect of Cold War freedom. The idea of free enterprise is going to be kind of replacing capitalism as the term. And it's going to be the thing that unites the free world. This economic system that rests on private ownership is going to unite the free world despite major differences in other areas. That is going to unite the social democracies of Western Europe, the countries of South America, capitalist economies of Asia, the United States against communism. And so competitive free enterprise is going to kind of use the symbols of freedom to sell and to invoke the symbols of freedom in selling things. And to some extent, the post-war economic boom is going to be encouraged by government's policies, despite businesses desire to keep government out of business. And as a part of this, Americans are going to abandon their traditional fear of large corporations. They're going to instead decide that freedom is not determined by having not having large corporations, but it's going to be by having the freedom to choose among several large corporations. And as a result of the new friendlier face of capitalism, there's going to be a sharp jump in the number of individuals who are investing in Wall Street. Two new strains of conservatism are going to come out in the 1950s. Libertarian conservatives are going to be very opposed to a strong national government. To libertarians, freedom means individual autonomy, limited government, and unregulated capitalism. Milton Friedman, a young economist, is going to become the purveyor of a lot of libertarian ideas. In 1962, he'll publish Capitalism and Freedom, identifying the free market as the necessary foundation for individual liberty. Friedman is going to call for turning over almost every aspect of society to private hands, and rolling back a lot of the New Deal things and putting them back in the hand of the private sector, saying that free choice is what's needed, not government regulation. This strain of conservatism is in many ways going to be kind of opposed to the other strain, which is the new conservatism, which is more concerned about moral decay than it is individual autonomy. New conservatives do want government intervention to be removed from the economy, but they deeply want government intervention in personal behavior and to restore Christian morality. This is that going back to the idea of Christian liberty, the idea that freedom is a moral condition and it requires a decision by independent men and women to lead virtuous lives or government action to force them to do so. So these two strands of conservatism are going to be deeply divided, but during the Cold War, they will be united by two common enemies, which are the Soviet Union and the federal government, the idea of big government, that provides a common foe that they can agree to fight. So that brings me to the end of this. I know this was kind of long, but this was the largest portion of the chapter. Hopefully the next couple of lectures will not be this long. Thanks for sticking with me to the end.